Hello, class. You are now looking at Module 3, and we're moving on to the next reading log 3. I wanted to give you a short video lecture to point out the most important things to remember so that you'll earn the full points for this reading log 3. The books that you'll read are historical fiction, informational, and biographical. Many of the biographical books would be considered history, but they are not fiction. If it's a biography, it's a real person, real events. If it's historical fiction, that means it's a story that could have happened during a particular time period, but it is still just a made up story. It might be a story like the stable boy at George Washington's home. Now, George Washington was a real person, but the stable boy would be historical fiction figure or, a made up person. So it's important that you understand the differences between these because, again, as a professional, when you select books or recommend books, wherever your setting might be, you want to be clear on what's fiction, what's not fiction, what's biographical. That's especially important these days with so many different conflicting news and informational sources. So we take this assignment seriously for that reason. Let's look at the document. This is if I open this up, these are your instructions. And once again, I point out that it's important when you describe through the summary and even in the recommendations, whenever you make a statement, you need to cite how you make that statement. You're not going to say, in my opinion. The only time you would do that would be you might say, in my opinion, this book would be great for children in an after school program, something like that. But when you start stating ages, you're not a literary expert. I don't think anyone is in this class. And so you need to cite the source of an expert. For this class, we're using two main experts. Sylvia Bardell in the big textbook, and the other is a collection of authors or writers in the Choosing Quality Children's Literature in the Wiki book. So those are the only two you need to worry about trying to cite. I'll bring to your attention, remember, you go back to in the very first module, the introductory module, remember right here, guides for citations. And that's in that very first module that had the welcome in it. Right here, you click on that and remember, you've got examples and exactly how you do it. Very simple. This one you can almost copy right here, choosing high quality children's literature. You can almost just copy that as long as you cite it properly in your reviews or summaries themselves. Now let's go to, I want to show you I'd like to show you some sample books for the assignment. Let me go back to the home here. And I recommend that you use the template. This course doesn't say it's required that you use the template, but I find that students are less likely to forget to leave something out or make an error if they use the template. So here's your template. And what you're going to do for this assignment is you're going to see under historical fiction, same thing, title, author, illustrator, if there is one, and copyright date. Remember, book titles need to be in italics. When you're writing a summary or even a memo to a supervisor, sometimes the communication can be misunderstood if the book title is not in italics. Let's just say you're requesting a book entitled, I Hate My Boss. No, it's a book title. If you don't put that in italics, you might be sending the wrong message to whoever you're sending the memo to. So always put your book titles in italics. And it's the same thing. You're going to have a summary of the book, very short description of setting, characters, plot, the main events in the person's life. If it's biography, but right now we're just looking at historical fiction. So we're talking about history. It might be in a time period that you're familiar with, but it's still just a made up story if it's historical fiction. So be careful about that. Let me show you some examples. I'm going to enter in Google historical fiction for children. Historical fiction for children. And when I do that, so you're going to get some of the best books that you can read and include in your reading log 3. This is a, let's see, Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, historical fiction. It's an award-winning book. It is not Mildred Taylor, and it's not a real long book, hard to read. You could read it pretty quickly. The War That Saved My Life. This one's a little bit longer, but it's one of the best books I've ever read about a child in World War II. So Henry's Freedom Box, same way. I know you're pressed for time, so you can pick one or two books that are shorter, like picture books to use for your reading log, but you should pick at least one good chapter book to read and review. So here's some examples of the historical fiction. Bud Not Buddy is another popular one that students often will review, and that's one of my favorites. Again, Number of the Stars is another popular one. Little House in the Big Woods, many of you, look at that copyright date, 1932. But it's still a very well-written book, and children love it. All right, let's go back now. We know, go back here. We know a little bit now about historical fiction. And look at the criteria. You will want to look at the cultural, but also the historic events in the book, the setting. Does it is it authentic? In other words, if you're going to write a review for a book about the 1930s Depression era, like I believe Grapes of Wrath is an example during Depression era. Well, if you were talking about the family sitting around the television, that book is not going to be very authentic, is it? So check for its authenticity according to the time period in the historical fiction story. Now let's go on to informational books. You've got two you need to review. One is going to be in social studies, and the second book is going to be in science. So let me show you some examples of where to find those books. We often have problems distinguishing between a social studies book and a historical fiction book. Social studies are a little bit more like textbooks, but there are some very good ones out there, and they're very interesting. Same way with science. They're a little bit like what you might find in a school classroom, but many of them are well written and entertaining. So I'm going to go to Google again. And I'm going to say informational books for children. and you'll see some of the ones that pop up are like what a waste. It's all about recycling. Another one all about weather. You see, it's not a storybook, but it's written so that it's entertaining for children. Look inside how things work. Many of you may be familiar with that well-known book, How Things Work, and it has articles, many articles about different things we see in everyday life. My First Book of Planets is another good book that is children like that because they like most anything connected with the study of space. So those are the books that you might choose for informational books. And then one other, biographies. So now I'm going to search for biographies for children. And we'll get a lot of those. And there are different reading levels. Here's a website, Best Biographies for Kids Grades 1 through 8. And here they are. Mark Twain, Odd Boy Out, Buzz Aldrin. Let's see if I can find some that then all right. Grandfather's Journey is a biography, and it's a story about a man, Alan Say, who came to the United States from Japan and what his experiences were. Eleanor, this is of course about Eleanor Roosevelt. Tommy DePola, he's a well-known illustrator and children's book. Apparently, this is his biography. Duke Ellington. So the list goes on and on. Biographies are very popular with children. They like to read about these famous people, especially when they're written at a child's level, easy to read for younger children all the way through middle school. So now let's go back. You see what the kinds of books that you need to be looking at. How are you going to recommend these books? Make sure it's the right reading and developmental level. The cultural characteristics of the book are authentic. And then here's where you can put in your opinion. If you enjoyed the book, why did you? I'm going to add links to some of the recommended books in each of these genres, and maybe that will help you find some books a little more quickly. Remember, your best sources are going to be either in Joyner Library's Teaching Resource Center or a nearby local library, or you can always go into a Barnes and Noble bookstore and go to the back and read one of the shorter picture books. They often you'll see people doing that. So I hope this is helpful, and I look forward to reading your reading log 3.